Hello everyone, my name is Brandon and I'm back with a new video today. Today I'm going to be covering my Atari 2600. What I have in front of you here is my 1978 Light Sixer. There's several different variations of the Atari 2600. You had the Heavy Sixer that was the release model. You have the Light Sixer. Then came the four switch model. And after that, I believe, was the Vader. And eventually in '86, you had the Atari 2600 Junior. Now, if we take a look at my console here, you have the power switch, the TV type between color and black and white, your left difficulty switch, right difficulty switch, game select, and your game reset. Here's the cartridge port. You get the nice wood paneling on the front, and if you look, it goes to a standard RCA RF cable. This is a old console, so it's RF out only unless it's modified. And if you look at the bottom of the console, here's where the channel select would go. My switch has long been broken, and so my system is stuck on channel 3. However, that's not an issue as there's no interference on channel 3. And if we take a look at the back of the console, you got everything is nicely labeled. You have your power adapter, your left and right controller port. Here's where the RF cable comes out. If you were to open this up, you would actually see that on the inside, this cable actually goes to another RCA jack on the inside. So replacing your cables, if the cable's cut or broken, is really simple and really easy with these consoles. The only issue that I have had with this one, in fact, I've had this one for over a decade, was I broke my game reset switch. Whoa. So that sucked. However, it was just a simple, easy fix. I was able to find the replacement part, desolder the old one, solder the new one in place. In 1986, Atari released the Atari 2600 Junior to coincide with the release of the Atari 7800. It was a cost-reduced version. It's much smaller in size. Some of these only have one chip inside. Some of them have multiple chips inside. I haven't disassembled this one to even look at it. I haven't had any issues. I just got this one recently, and it was a good price, untested. Plugged it in, tested everything. Everything worked. The only thing that was wrong was I was missing all the screws. However, I have a parts bin of screws. And if we look here, it's a lot smaller compared to the original console, and it's a lot lighter. So you have your on and off switch, your TV type here, and some later games that would have been released around this time, your TV type switch actually functions as a pause button. You have the game select and the game reset, which are now just simple push buttons. And then if we take a look, you have your channel select switch right here between channel 2 and 3. You have your difficulty switches, your two controller ports, and then you have your RF out, which switches to just a standard RCA jack instead of the built-in cable. So this is a lot smaller, neater, compact package. I kind of like this better. And one of the more unique add-ons that I have gotten over the years was I bought this, I believe, at a Games Exchange over in Texas near Beaumont, and I've looked online and they call it a Game Brain. So the interesting thing about the Game Brain is that you have multiple slots here. This plugs into your console like so, and you take your games and you plug your games in one at a time and you turn off your console, and you can just toggle between which games you want to play. You got two empty spaces here, which are great. You could use this, as storage, as so. But it's a very fun game console to have. I highly recommend picking up an Atari 2600 or even an Atari 7800 just to play the 2600 game library. However, keep note, if you are doing that, some games do not work on the 7800. They will only work on a 2600. I believe Robot Tank is one of those. Or if you had the Starpath Acadia Supercharger. There's many peripherals to look at when we look at the Atari 2600. Here are some first-party examples that I own. On release, there was the CX10 joystick. I do not own one of these, however, they're more complicated and usually more sought after for collector's value than the CX40s that I have here. The CX40 released a year later, and they continued to simplify the design and cheapen the cost of manufacture over the years. I have a standard and black, as well as the beige that came with the Atari XEGS, which was actually a 8-bit computer made into a home console. The paddle controllers are going to be the second most prevalent controller out there for use in games such as Breakout or Circus, and these work with potentiometers inside with 2 controllers to each port, and the fire buttons are right here on the side. Similar to the paddle controller is the not so common driving controller. These were only used for one game commercially, which is Indy 500. Unlike the paddles, these are one per port and uses a rotary encoder instead of potentiometers, meaning that I can continually spin this infinitely as long as I want, and you have the fire button right here on the side. There are multiple models of keypads for the Atari 2600. They are all electronically identical, so if you need a video touchpad, the CX50 here can be used and such vice versa. The video touchpad came with the release of Star Raiders and allowed for additional inputs for certain game functions such as shields or maps. The CX50 can be locked together with a second controller and be used for adjusting the inputs for, say, like Atari basic programming. The third that I do not own here would be the kids controller, which was bundled with many of the Sesame Street games. However, I could use any one of these controllers on those if I choose to. With any major successful console, you'll have third-party controllers and accessories, and a few that I have here are to show you. I have some old ones, such as this Gemini Gemstick. This is a fairly common third-party controller you can find out in the wild. I've seen some complaints online that the stick is not large enough. However, for me and my use in testing, I actually have no issue using it. I actually like these. I bought a few of them actually and rewired some for other consoles, but I do recommend these. But with the rise of emulation consoles, some other manufacturers have thrown their hat into the market, such as this Hyperkin Ranger. The Hyperkin Ranger features a joystick, fire button, potentiometer on the end here for paddle controls, but the unique feature about this is you have a switch on top to adjust between left-handed or right-handed mode, and a switch on the bottom to change between stick inputs and paddle inputs. However, something to be aware of is that depending on which way you adjust for left-handed or right-handed mode can reverse your paddle inputs. Since the Atari 2600 has set the standard for many other manufacturers, some other controllers for other systems can work on the console as well. Here I have the joystick from Commodore for the VIC-20. This will work on the Atari 2600 as well as 2600 controllers working on the VIC-20. Here I have the later ColecoVision controller, and this will work as well too. You have your standard joystick input as well as your fire button here. However, for some games, such as Omega Race, you can actually use this where the fire button is your thrust control and the secondary button here is fire. And then with some later consoles, such as the 7800, its joystick as well works. And they have no issue using these. Both buttons will map to fire. And that goes with even new manufactured wireless controllers, such as I believe it's the CX70 for the 7800 Plus, based off the European controller, but wireless. This one right here is probably my preferred use of input just because it's wireless. The only issues I could find with using a wireless controller when it comes to using it on other consoles may be missing the 5-volt needed to run the wireless receiver. So Texas Instruments TI-99 computer, it will not work if you make a conversion kit for the Magnavox Odyssey 2, that won't work as well either. With how simple the controllers are, there's actually many mods you can do. Now, the standard Genesis controller will work on the Atari 2600, however I do not recommend it for other systems. I believe it's the Commodore VIC-20 and the Commodore 64. The additional inputs here can actually cause damage to the computer. However, this is not a standard Sega Genesis controller. I have modified this. I've removed all ICs and all transistors from the board, cut some traces, and wired the wires in differently for use with Omega Race. So I have my thrust control, my fire control. These are the inputs that would be added from the booster, which I do not own. And my regular fire control is C. And then over here is the NES 64. Now this is made for the Commodore 64, and which both buttons are mapped to jump. Start and select are mapped to nothing. I have a regular D-pad for input, but if you notice here, I have a switch to change between A for jump or fire to up for games that require you to press up for jump. So if you're used to playing like Super Mario for the NES, you can actually hit this switch right here and have A for jump. So you can run, action, jump. Indy 500, released in 1977, was published by Atari. It was programmed by Carlo Meninsky and Ed Riddle. It was a release title for the console and the only commercial game to utilize the driving controller, where the knob is the steer and the fire button is your accelerator. Scoring is dependent on game mode. You have 3 game modes with race, crash and score, and tag. For single-player races and crash and score are time trials against the clock. 2-player races are first to 25 laps, and the 2-player crash and score is first to 50 points. In the tag variation, every second that you're not it, you gain points. The difficulty switches affect the top speed of the cars. A for faster cars, B for slower. Games 1 through 4 are races. Games 5 through 8 are crash and score. Games 9 and 10 are tag, while games 11 through 14 are ice race variations. Omega Race, released in 1983, published by CBS Electronics. Programming was done by Alex Nevelson. The game requires a booster grip. However, many people have lost that, and the booster grip is a little bit expensive. However, there are some homemade options available to you. The cartridge advertises RAM Plus, which is an additional 256 bytes of RAM accessible to the cartridge. It's a 1 or 2 player game with players taking turns each round. Setting the right difficulty switch to B will allow 2 players to share the same controller, whereas leaving it on A, each player has to have their own controller. The object of the game is to evade enemy fire and score points by destroying various types of Omega warrior ships and photon mines you'll encounter speeding around the mysterious cosmic arena. The booster and Atari fire button both control the same function as the thruster, whereas the booster grip trigger is now fire. Lives are awarded at 30,000, 80,000, and 150,000 points. Each rack are Omega attack waves, which will have droid ships sit motionless and are more of an obstacle than a threat and more prevalent in early stages. Command ships are your main target that travel around the arena and fire at the player. Upon destruction, a droid ship shall take its place. Death ships, should you fail in destroying the command ship quickly, it may transform into a death ship, which travels much faster, more accurate shots, and leaves photon mines in its wake that you must destroy or evade. The game ends when you lose all lives and there is no limit to the waves. Super Breakout, released in 1978, programmed by Nick Turner and Carol Shaw, published by Atari, is a 1 or 2 player alternating game using paddle controllers. There are 5 game variations, with the first one being Breakout, Double, Cavity, Progressive, and the children's version. Progressive is the only game mode that is 1 player only. The object of the game is to keep the ball in play as long as you can and knock out the bricks to score as many points as possible. The controls of the console are the game select to switch between game variations, game reset to select game or reset your current game. The difficulty switches: left is for player 1, right is for player 2, A is for advanced, B is for beginner, giving you a larger paddle to play with. After the ball reaches the top, your paddle is reduced by half. Millipede. Millipede, released in 1984, programmed by Dave Stogis and published by Atari. It is a single-player game that uses the joystick, and the manual reads, "An army of menacing millipedes, cousins to the famed centipede, have invaded your garden patch, and you must shoot arrows at them to rid this plot of your pesky pests. But wait, the millipedes aren't the only insidious insects you must destroy. Jumping spiders, buzzing bees, bouncing beetles, mosquitoes, dragonflies, and inchworms, earwigs all have unique and deadly powers of their own." Midnight Magic. Midnight Magic released in 1986 and is programmed by Glenn Axworthy and published by Atari. It is a 1 to 2 player game with alternating turns, 2 players requiring 2 joysticks. For a pinball game, the controls are pretty simple. You pull towards you to pull back the spring and fire and launch balls. On the right is to activate right paddles, move the stick to the left to activate left paddles, moving it back will activate both paddles. Your difficulty switches, in the A position, the bumpers and center posts must be activated by hitting the target with the arrows. B, the bumpers and center posts are active at all times. Missile Command, released in 1981, programmed by Rob Fulop, published by Atari, is a 1 to 2 player alternating turn with joystick controls. The object of the game is to defend your cities and missile base. There are 2 kinds of missiles: Smart, which will try to invade your missiles, and Dumb, which travel straight to the target. The enemy attacks in waves, which each successful wave move faster and are more difficult to defend against. You begin each wave with 30 missiles. 10 missiles are stored in a base at the time. If a missile hits your cities, they are destroyed. If a missile hits your base, you lose the remaining missile stock in the base. Once you run out of missiles, you are defenseless until the next round. Your left difficulty switch is for player 1, right is for player 2. A is for hard mode, B is for normal. There are 34 game variations, with 1 through 17 being single player, and 18 through 34 are 2 player. Levels 17 and 34 are children's level with the easiest of gameplay. Variations make changes to how slow or fast your target control system is, smart enemy cruise missiles versus dumb enemy cruise missiles, or changes in how fast or hard the starting wave is. Space Invaders, released in 1980, is programmed by Richard Marr and published by Atari, is a 1 to 2 player game with 2 players simultaneous co-op play possible. Your objective is to destroy these invaders by firing your laser cannon. You must wipe out the invaders either before they reach the Earth at the bottom of the screen or before they hit you 3 times with their laser bombs. Each successful wave clear causes the invaders to spawn closer to Earth with each new wave. There are 112 game variations with variables for moving shields, zigzagging bombs, fast bombs, invisible invaders, with 1-player games, 2-player versus, or 2-player co-op. The difficulty switches control players 1 and 2's cannon size. A is for a larger cannon that is easier to hit, B is for a smaller cannon that's easier to dodge with. Galaxian is a single-player game released in 1983, programmed by Mark Ackerman, Glenn Parker, and Tom Collarwood, and published by Atari. Galaxians attack in waves in which each wave becomes more difficult. There are 9 skill levels. Each level corresponds to the wave number difficulty. Difficulty switches control the firing modes for the cannon. A, you must fire the missile with every press of a fire button, and B, the fire mode is changed to auto-fire, with the only limitation is that only 2 missiles can be on screen at a time. Adventure. Adventure is a single-player game released in 1980, programmed by Warren Robinett and published by Sears. It is the first game credited with having an Easter egg. The object of the game is to rescue the enchanted chalice and place it inside the golden castle where it belongs. There are 3 castles in the kingdom: the White Castle, Black Castle, and Golden Castle. Each castle has a gate over its entrance. The gate can be opened with the corresponding colored key. Inside each castle are rooms or dungeons depending on your skill level you are playing. The castles are separated by rooms, pathways, labyrinths. Common to all skill levels is the blue labyrinth, through which you must find your way to the Black Castle. Skill levels 2 and 3 have more complicated kingdom layouts. Last on my list is Phoenix. Phoenix is a single-player game released in 1982, programmed by Michael Feinstein and Jack Marikak, and published by Atari. You have 5 lives in which you must survive bombing attacks from flocks of warbirds who protect the alien ship. In later stages, you must aim for the center of the bird. If you only take out a wing, much like its ancestor, it will regrow a new one shortly. Upon making it to the end stage, you must chip away at the alien ship and the rotating blue layer to get a clear shot at the alien pilot. Difficulty switches on this game, however, only remove or add the background music, as the game is already difficult to begin with.